Hello, thank you for clicking on this video. This video, as the title already presents itself, is regarding the topic of Calvinism. Predestination. Hot topics since the Reformation have been circling around. This video, just a heads up, is not going to be particularly about searching into the entwinings of this topic, like what does the Bible say about it, or it's not going to be a video stretching out the 5 points of Calvinism, like that of predestination, election, total depravity, irresistible grace. It's not going to be a video of looking on the fine points of Calvinism. This is just going to be a video of maybe challenging some misunderstandings that you have had and we have had as a body. Just to do a sort of little summary of what has motivated me to sort of do this video. So 3 months ago, I decided to take on the task to actually ask myself these questions I'd been avoiding for some time, that I've heard some pretty strong debates towards. I have friends that would consider themselves reformed, meaning just simply people that are from the tradition of holding the 5 points of Calvinism. And it was something that I've always put off because I knew, well, it's quite a deep, miry bog to enter into. And it's quite thick. There's a lot there, and this wouldn't be enough to actually explore all of that in one video too. This, I'm hoping, is going to be a short enough video, just really explaining where it stems from and what I have found interesting in my study. So 3 months ago, when I wanted to sort of do this study, I thought, well, I think it would be wise to go to the roots, to the Reformation. Let's go to the writers at the time of the Reformation and let's just see what they wrote about it. I think that is something we should do more often nowadays. It's something I'm trying to practice myself in my own faith, is just going back to what the original early church fathers would write about something, whether you want to call the reformers early church fathers, but let's just go back to what these people actually wrote so we don't really misunderstand them, and maybe we can actually hold a better case against or a better case for. So I took the task to get Calvin's Institutes. I haven't read all of it. There's a lot here. I mean, it's not enough to get through in 2-3 months. I mean, maybe if you're a faster reader than I am, but I got this book and I've literally, I believe I've gotten through all of the topics on free will, predestination. I touched in quite a few bits on total depravity as well. That most of that's in book 3. However, I think there's some bits throughout the other books. So the Institutes is actually divided up into 3 books. So there's just 3 in 1 in here. So there's quite a bit in here. And I also got Martin Luther's Bondage of the Will. And this was written by Martin Luther addressing a guy at the time called Erasmus, who was also a key figure in the Reformation. He had a lot to do on sort of more of the political side of the Reformation, just seeing the injustice done in the Catholic Church, and really was against that. However, Luther was more on I'd say the theological side of the Reformation, just targeting the heart of the matter, rather than just the outside, which is where they differ. And Luther strongly in that book sort of just tackles the human false presupposition that we have is that we actually have agency, and having agency presents its problems, because if we have an agency, how does our agency work with our salvation? And we've, throughout not only Martin Luther but all throughout the ages, we've had this discussion, is how does our agency collide with God's sovereignty in the workings of our salvation, and whether that is going to be the predeterminer of we fall into Pelagianism, I think, I think I said that right. I might have completely ruined that, but I'm pretty sure Pelagianism was a movement in the early church that skewed our theology on salvation by saying it is by what we do. So we use our human agency, our full power, to work out our salvation, and we pertain salvation by our merits. And then there's semi-Pelagianism, which is obviously it's in the word, it's semi, so it's not as full, but it happened later on throughout church history where it was more of adopted into the Catholic Church. However, it's still adopted today. And that's more of the view that we do work towards our salvation, and where we lack, that's where Christ sort of, that's what the thing Christ did on the cross was for. That's just to cover what we don't quite get, what we aren't quite able to achieve. He's just more of the, maybe we're a few cents short. So he's the guy that covers us and allows us to get our ice cream. And that's how I would sort of present those two views. Obviously, there's more to it, but that's just a brief analogy and summary of those two views. Looking into just actually, before I did this study, I had some assumptions of Calvin and Luther, like we all do. We all naturally have things we've heard, things we may actually have read, things we may actually know. But we do have presuppositions of these characters, what they're known for, what they taught. When I got Calvin's Institutes and I got Luther's Bondage of the Will, I thought these were two differing views. I was completely mistaken. For some reason, I thought, well, Calvin held more of the libertarianism view of the Catholic Church, which is the Catholic Church's view upon free will that is very similar to that of the Methodist movement, which more hold to, and the Baptist movement, which more hold to sort of an Arianism sort of view of free will. And that's where I thought Luther sort of strung. I was completely mistaken. Since then, I believe I've learned a lot more about the Reformation and what that actually entailed. I've learned a lot about Luther from not only reading this, but a few other sources. I think coming into here, I had views, especially upon Calvin, which more swung to is Calvin arguing that God is the author of destruction. And naturally, I had a problem with that. I had a problem with this view of we're going to be careful, we're going to tread carefully here, because we don't want to make God the author of all destruction. Because if God is fully sovereign over our salvation, meaning it's God who works our salvation entirely, and it's even the people he doesn't work, those that don't come to Christ and be saved, they are also the product of God's agency of choosing to work evil in them and choosing them to send them to hell. And I had a problem with this going into this, and I think I was quite surprised to read in Book 3 of Institutes that Calvin never presents that as his argument. In fact, he quite clearly states throughout there where he clearly, in his analysis of this theological view, he very carefully gives us where that doesn't quite work. Like, he doesn't paint it as if God is the one that is pouring fresh evil into a sinner and sending them to hell. Rather, it is the mystery of our wills. It's we will ourselves to damnation, and God passes over that and allows us to work our own corruptible nature and to damn ourselves. So it's not that God is over above and he concocts his soup and works the intertwinings of evil within a sinner as if they didn't already have those qualities and traits. And rather, he allows them to the fullness of their own wayward way. I think where this still presents the trouble is, well, God deliberately chooses not to save someone, and God chooses to initiate grace by predestining someone to go to heaven. All these things have a lot of things, and this would be used to talk about all this would have to go to a different video. However, one thing I just want to notably point out from this study is what I found interesting is Calvin never denies free will. And I think that's a common misunderstanding that we have in today's culture. And Same to go with Luther. Luther never denies free will, just the terminology of free will. So free will has a lot attached to it with this word we add at the front, which is free. Depending on how that freeness is portrayed, that's where they would disagree or agree. So mostly they would be happy if a right definition was ascribed to the word free will and what that actually entailed. I believe they would be happy to agree with free will. However, we do have to deal with the crux of this issue, which is the belief that we are depraved as sinners. That's where the crux of this whole debate holds. I believe whether you hold to the 5 points of Calvinism, whether you don't, I think naturally if you are going to hold to an Augustinian view or a Lutheran view or a Calvinist view or even a Catholic view in the Thomist sect, well, actually just Catholicism as a whole, should I say, I'm unsure about Orthodox, but of original sin. If we hold to original sin, I think naturally, depending on your definition of free will, depending on your definition of original sin, naturally you're going to come to some sort of Calvinist theology naturally anyway, because you have to work with the thing is human beings have a thing called original sin. It doesn't just give us a bag of rocks to carry around that makes us stumble occasionally, but the rocks is separate from us. It's but rather the depravity of our original sin corrupts our nature and causes us to do nothing but sin. Even our thoughts are wayward, and what we sort of achieve to do are corrupt with some sort of immoral thoughts and thinkings and all that. So when we sort of hold to this, it's naturally God has to come in somehow and work in our salvation to free us from this. It is something that we can't do. In fact, because we're so depraved in our nature, we can't even choose Christ, not fully and not completely. We cannot completely surrender. Rather, it has to be a work of God in our lives to achieve that in us. I know that's a lot there. There's a lot of discussion, but simply I think for the purpose of this video, for keeping it short, for just maybe presenting some discussion in the comments below, is I think our understanding of modern day Calvinism, or I would like to use the term Reformed theology, is vastly different from that in which the Reformers actually held and that in which actually the Catholic Church held. I would like to also preface this point that predestination, election, free will, and those sort of pertaining elements, they weren't as controversial as they are today. Don't get me wrong, they held incredible controversial elements, especially the idea of free will, but when it came down to predestination, they weren't as controversial as they are today. I think the main areas of critique that the Catholic Church pinned against the Reformers, such as Martin Luther and John Calvin, was more so their rejection of papal authority rather than their theological views pertaining election, predestination, and as such. Martin Luther, when he was actually training up to be a monk in his Augustinian monastery, he got given a Bible, which was a gift from his colleagues, and he also got given a book of Augustine. And upon reading this, that is where Martin Luther came to his firm views upon predestination. So I think understanding that Martin Luther, as someone who was a Catholic monk, a Catholic ordained priest, who was in the Catholic Church, held to those theological views, and that was okay. And it just goes to show that Martin Luther held theological views that weren't actually as controversial as we make them out to be today. So I think understanding that helps us ask, maybe it gives you the question, what would it look like if we, as a church, go back to these writings, explore them, and actually untangle the weeds of what modern day culture just throws at us and tells what these theological views, what these beliefs lead us to believe. And I think you'll be quite surprised that they don't actually lead you to where you think. And if not, I think upon this journey where I've come to more of a grounded, it's been a very rewarding study, searching the writings of these early reformers, learning so much, but also coming to new ideas of what I had previously not thought of, and detangling the weeds of my narrow mind and understanding actually we have a lot of unity. We have a lot of unity on these areas. And just from this video here, I would just encourage you to look into the reformers, look into the writings. I would love to leave some sources in the description below where you could go to yourself and look into these things. And hopefully, if you have any comments down below or any questions you want to ask, I'd be happy to answer them and possibly do another video of actually dissecting where I would land upon these views and where I have landed. I would definitely say I'm a 5-point Calvinist now. That is something that is complex on its own. That statement brings a lot of alarm bells to a lot of people and a lot of questions too. But however, I think by just reading these books and also doing a lot of other study along the side of this, I have definitely come to a different view than I had previously had, and it's been incredibly fruitful and sanctifying, and I hope this video could sanctify you as well. Hey, thank you for watching.